I was remembering in elementary where I lived, the report card we used to get, you got three grades, O, S, or U, outstanding, satisfactory, unsatisfactory. I was a solid, satisfactory student. But one of the things underneath, I just remember this as a kid, I paid more attention to that the teacher could fill these boxes out and check these boxes about kind of positive things the student was doing and maybe areas, as they call them, of growth or where you stink. And the one that I seem to be really good at, the box, like I nailed it every time, and actually as a 40-year-old, I'm pretty good at this one. It was this box that says, distracts others from completing tasks. I was like really consistent about that, really all through school. Because to me, it's like that kid over there doing what they're supposed to be doing. I mean, it just looks so lonely, right? Like they need to be tapped on the head with a pencil probably or something, let's liven this thing up. So even here I am like working on sermons, and just like what Ginger was saying, I just will stop my sermon and think someone is in another room that I need to disrupt from what they're doing. It's kind of a holy calling I have. But I just... I remember all the way through junior high, though. I don't know if you ever had this done to you, but they would take that box and put it around your desk. You know what I'm talking about? No, you didn't experience this. But because I distracted so many people, there was this box that they would put over my desk so I couldn't see anyone. It's called prison, people, for an extrovert. But I was really good at helping people not pay attention, struggled with it myself. But I think if you think about the world we live in, it really is, year by year, getting harder and harder to pay attention to what matters. Do you all see this? Well, let me just give you one clear example. 20 years ago in basketball, playing college basketball, it was much easier to shoot a free throw. Well, here's a picture of what it's like today to shoot a free throw. March Madness is coming up. That's a Carolina player, I believe. But here you're trying to shoot a free throw, and sometimes these people have those pool noodles, and they stand straight, and as you get ready to shoot, everyone behind you goes, just a little bit off. And then there's some guy twirling that spinner thing that makes you dizzy, and people have dressed up, and I saw someone kind of acting like they were delivering a baby. Anything they can do to keep you from shooting a free throw. Like this week, if you saw this too, Tiger Woods was putting. It was a pretty important putt, and in his backswing, some guy just starts yelling, right? So that wasn't, in my opinion, I didn't see this kind of stuff happening 20 years ago. I feel sorry for my daughter playing basketball. It's hard to play kids sports. I don't know if you've thought about this, but because you got one kid who's just trying to concentrate on what they're trying to do, and you have 39 adults screaming at them to do something different, right? Shoot it, pass it, rah, rah. And they're just kind of like, having an anxiety attack on the court because everyone is yelling at them, and I'm one of them, telling them what to do. But think about our culture just in general. I think about multitasking. Like I've always glorified multitasking. Like, oh, they're awesome. They can do 100 things, at the same time at a sea level, Research is showing more and more, the more we multitask, that what we do is actually not that great. The output of the multitask is not that great. Our retirees are so busy, they're hard to get with, and our 8-year-olds have crammed schedules. When we say, I'm so busy, or our family's so busy, it's kind of like a status symbol. I'm not preaching to you. I'm talking to me, by the way. But it's almost like a status symbol, like, oh, we're so crammed with things, and kind of wear it as a badge of honor. Like if someone were to say, yeah, I come home from work and eat dinner with the family, and we just kind of hang out together, and you think, are you okay? Are you sick? Are you depressed? Why are you not doing 10 extra things after work or after school? It's kind of the culture we live in. If you haven't read this article, it's in the Wall Street Journal, I think in October, but the title of the article is How Smartphones Hijack Our Mind, right? Again, sometimes we can make fun of or pick on the millennials, or we pick on high school students and their phones. I think when it comes to smartphones, there is guilt that goes through all generations, including to me. But one of them was that we look at our phones 80 times a day, and the research was showing that it causes a division of attention, and you know that. But when our attention is divided, so think about that for tonight. When our attention is divided, there's research showing that it impedes not just our performance, which I think you all agree with. It impedes our performance, but it actually impedes our reasoning. When our attention is divided, we struggle to even reason with situations because our attention is so many different places. Do you know what nomophobia is? It's a real thing. Nomophobia is this feeling if you go into a room and either you don't have your phone, you can't get to your phone, or there's no Wi-Fi. It's like a real deal. And so there was this research showing, like, if the phone is on your desk, this is how well you pay attention. If it's in your pocket, you pay a little bit better attention. And if it's out of the room, you pay much more attention and get more done when your smartphone is out of the room. We have nomophobia. We start to worry that someone might need me, or we might miss the score of, if did Carolina score in the last 30 seconds, I got to see that. And there's this thing. I'm going to confess something to you real quick. The church I came from in Colorado, I was big into fantasy football, and on certain services, I had to wear a black robe and look all fancy and pastoral. But I would check my fantasy score, and I'd press my robe against my pocket up there. I could actually see my phone and scroll through the robe to see how my team was doing. I know. Forgive me, Father. So I'm not preaching. Yeah, I'm saying, what is this need that we have for this, to constantly be connected? Here's the truth. As I look through kind of all these stats of busyness and distraction, it kind of makes me want to curl up with a blanket and suck my thumb, right? And eat a donut and be like, oh my gosh. But it's the world I'm raising kids in. It's the world I'm participating in. And part of me is thinking, how do you follow and love Jesus in the midst of this truth? Here's the truth, and I thought about it, and I'm going to just speak for me. This kind of frantic way of living that we've kind of bought into, many of us, it's exhausting. It's exhausting. Trying to feel like we have to be at all things and be in all things. It's an exhausting way for us to live life. I think we're wearing out our kids. Kim and I talk about this a lot. When I'm exhausted, when I'm frantic or distracted, I'm out of focus. And when I'm out of focus, think about this. When we say pay attention to something, or that person pays attention, we're saying what they're looking at is positive. But when someone's distracted, that we use that word, if it's negative, they're still paying attention. But the question is what you're paying attention to. So if we think you're paying attention to the teacher or the right thing, that's good. If you're paying attention to something else, we use the word distracted. But for me, when I'm out of focus, meaning not first gazing and paying attention to who God is and what God's about, I can tell you this, and this is true. My life lacks fruit. When I'm out of focus, I'm paying attention to what God's up to, my life lacks fruit. And here's what I mean by fruit. When we look in Galatians, we talk about the fruit of God's presence, his spirit. And when God shows up, certain things happen. So when God shows up in Nate Stratman's life, you will see patience. You will see self-control. You will see kindness because God has taken up residence in my life. And the flip side's true too, right? If God has not taken up residence in our lives, we are impatient. We lack self-control. And so what I think about is when I am frantic and I think about God's fruit, what I'm missing more than anything is peace. Because when I'm so distracted, I'm lacking peace. I'm definitely lacking self-control. And I'm lacking patience. When I'm trying to be at all places and catch up with all kinds of information, I'm lacking those three things, I think, more than any other. The truth is it affects every relationship we have, right? Our home, our workplace, if we're dating, our roommates, whatever it may be, it affects all those things. And I think my guess is many of you have experienced this. Am I preaching kind of to the choir, or am I preaching to a bunch of people like, your pastor is messed up, I'm on, okay. But here's the question. We talk about it a lot. We talk about it a lot in our culture. There's articles all over the place about it. But how do you stop the madness? That's the question. How do we stop some of this madness of this feeling that we are so distracted and we have trouble paying attention? Nehemiah gives us clues. That's why I've been so excited. This is our last day of Nehemiah. But Nehemiah gives us clues, and I'm kind of saying that Nehemiah is the patron saint of focus. If you go back, I would encourage you, if the football game's no good, go read the first six chapters of Nehemiah, and you're going to see this incredible focus that Nehemiah has. And yes, he wasn't distracted with smartphones, but he was distracted with, I would say, stuff that's much more distracting, in my opinion, than smartphones. So here's kind of, as I read this, I want to go back just a second, in case you haven't been with us, but God gave Nehemiah a burden, and we've talked about that last week. Mike Mattis touched on this. God gives us a burden for certain things. Nehemiah was living a cush life in the palace with King Artaxerxes. He was the cupbearer, right? He would taste all the wine before the king would taste it or drink it. And he had this incredible, comfortable life. And he found out this news that his people had been exiled, that the wall in Jerusalem torn down, the temple, and basically God gave him a burden to go back and build that wall. So each week we've been seeing how he's rallied the troops and how Nehemiah has helped to rebuild that wall. And he goes for it, right? He feels God's calling him to something, and he doesn't like talk about it for a real long time. He prays about it, but he goes for it. The minute he goes for it, opposition sets in, distraction sets in. You know, like the free throw shooter trying to shoot free throws and all these things going on behind the scene. That happens to Nehemiah from the get-go. So in the 6th chapter, which is kind of close to the end of the actual wall part of Nehemiah's story, we're going to pick up, and I'm going to read it to you. Verse 1. When word came to Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, so these are the 3 people that have been kind of talking trash to him the whole time and trying to distract Nehemiah. And if you're here 2 weeks ago, I said that they're like those old men in the Muppets that sit in the balcony and they go, wah, wah, wah. That's these guys. So it says, and the rest of our enemies that I had heard that I rebuilt the wall and not a gap was left in it. So they're hearing that he's rebuilt this wall, which they said he'd never do. And it's actually almost done, and he's done it really well. And he says, though up at that time I had not set the doors in the gates. Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message. Come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono. So 20 miles away is this town, and it sounds nice what they're trying to do, but they're trying to lure Nehemiah away to essentially capture him and take him away because he's a threat. But they were scheming to harm me, so I sent messengers to them with this reply. I love this. I'm carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you? 4 times they sent me the same message, and each time I gave them the same answer. The distraction is persistent. His response is persistent. Verse 5. Then the 5th time Sanballat sent his aide to me with the same message, and in his hand was an unsealed letter in which this was written. So he's cranking up the heat a little bit. It's reported among the nations, and Geshem says it's true that you and the Jews are plotting to revolt, and therefore you're building the wall. Moreover, according to these reports, you are about to become their king and have even appointed prophets to make this proclamation about you in Jerusalem. There's a king in Judah. Now this report will get back to the king, so come, let us meet together. I sent him this reply. Nothing like what you are saying is happening. You're just making it up in your head. They were all trying to frighten us, thinking their hands will get too weak for the work, and it will not be completed. And then here's this closing prayer as we look at all these prayers of Nehemiah. But I prayed, now strengthen my hands. So I'm going to go back through that just a second because I think it might be helpful of kind of what is happening in the scene. So distraction takes place. It keeps taking place for Nehemiah, really from the same people. They do it 4 times because they don't want him to complete what God has set out for him to do. They want to take his mind off what he's supposed to be doing. I don't know if you heard in the news this week, but about Tom Brady, who has a football game tonight. But he has all these interviews with a certain radio station in Boston, and someone on that radio station said some real kind of out-of-bounds things about his daughter, right? It's a football game. What does a young kid have anything to do with the football game? But sometimes when people want to mess with someone or get attention, they go personal. And that's what's happening. They're going personal on Nehemiah as he's trying to focus on what God's called him to. But what's his response? And by the way, I think we're going to see Tom Brady's response tonight. I think he plays well under pressure. And I think Nehemiah does too. His response is, hey, I can't go meet you guys because what I'm doing is great. I'm carrying out a great project. So what's Nehemiah saying? He's saying God's in this. He's like, God has called me to this. He's called me out of this kind of comfortable, cush life to go do something more risky, and God is in this. So I'm going to keep my eyes focused on what God is up to, and to show this great confidence to the people that were trying to distract him and take his eyes off what he's supposed to be doing. But when God is in this, and I've heard this my whole life, and I've never really believed it. When God is really in something and doing something in your family, in your life, opposition's right around the corner. It's just the way it works. That as God is really doing something, you feel like you're getting traction and you're experiencing God, there will be opposition. And the truth is, I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, sometimes the opposition comes from other Christians. Sometimes it comes from people you dearly love who are kind of saying things that are hurtful. And all of it is used to take our eye off of what we're supposed to be focusing on. So the distraction increases. You see this. There's these rumors. He's saying all these things. He's trying to create his own king. But here's what I love about Nehemiah, is he doesn't take the bait on this. I mean, sometimes people try to get us to gossip. They try to get us to go down some kind of trail we're not supposed to go down. And so they kind of put out this bait, this shiny thing with a big old sharp hook in it. And whatever the sin is, that shiny bait looks really good. And is this idea that we want to nibble on that. And Nehemiah is so focused, he's not going to mess with this. He's not going to retaliate. And I'll tell you, in my sinful nature, someone does that to me, I want to clear my name. I want to say, whoa, you march down here, sir. Let's talk about this. What you're saying is not true. But Nehemiah keeps doing what God's called him to do. But here's the question. We say this all the time, okay? Stay focused on God. How do you do that? In this culture, the reality of this culture, how do you, whether you're in middle school, elementary, whether you're retired, how do you stay focused on God in a world that's so distracting? Here's what he did. It's not going to be some kind of like aha answer. It's the central part of our faith. He prayed, and he kept praying. Go back and read the 6 chapters of Nehemiah. Curveballs are thrown at him nonstop, and every time he gets a curveball, he prays. Quick prayers, long prayers, I'm mad prayers, I'm frustrated prayers, I'm crying prayers, I need you, God, I love you prayers. Every flavor of prayer that exists in the whole category of prayer, Nehemiah does it nonstop. I think the truth is, the more you pray, the less you panic. Have you guys experienced that? The more you pray, the less you panic. Have you ever known someone who's a real prayerful person, and then when they're done praying, they're like, they start to panic? No, you haven't seen it, right? When I panic is when I can tell I'm not connecting with God. When I connect with God first, panic starts to go away. I think you've probably seen that in your life. Last week, the Risleys and Blake was with me. We were in Houston at a church gathering of our ECO denomination, and Condoleezza Rice was speaking there because she is part of ECO. She goes to a church in Menlo Park in the Bay Area. And one of the questions I thought was really interesting, they asked her about how she responded during September 11th. And when the person was asking the question, I thought, this could get kind of controversial. And really what she talked about was prayer. You know, and as people followed up with her, it's like it was a moment for a lot of people on September 11th of great panic. But she talked about people kind of hitting their knees and praying. Now, for some people, that would make them panic of thinking, wait, our nation's leaders hit their knees in prayer. But that's the first thing I want someone who's leading me to do, is to hit your knees in prayer. Not everyone did it, but she was saying that's all she knew to do at first. Nehemiah does the same thing. He continually hits his knees in prayer. The way I look at it is Nehemiah keeps checking in with the boss, right? Things keep happening. He keeps checking in with the boss, keeps checking in with the boss. When we talk about like praying without ceasing, as Paul talks about, that's all it is. As you're driving to work, as you're in your shower, as whatever you're doing, as something comes up on your phone that reminds you of something else, that's what praying without ceasing does. I remember there's a school I would drive by every morning, and it was just a reminder to pray for kids in school. School's tough, right? That's this pray without ceasing that Paul talks about. But in this kind of prayer, it's a specific kind of prayer that Nehemiah offers up, and I want to spend a couple minutes just kind of diving into the type of prayer that it is. This is a prayer of supplication, is the fancy word, but as we look at this series of wow, sorry, thanks, help, it's the 4th one. It's the help prayer. Supplication means I need supplies, spiritual supplies. And so you know this prayer. Some would say of all 4 of those prayers, we go to this one the most. God, give me, or give my friend Eric this. We're asking him to supply these things on our behalf or someone else's. So what was his? He said, God, strengthen my hands. I love that prayer. He didn't flee. He didn't run away. He didn't say, God, remove me from this situation. He said, we're here to build this wall. Yes, they're talking trash. They've been talking trash the whole time. Strengthen our hands. We're getting tired. We want to finish. We want to put these gates in and these doors in. We're going to finish this project and protect the people. Strengthen our hands was his prayer. Now, I have some people that say, they critique the 4th one. They say, that's just begging, right? That kind of prayer is when you show up to God and wah, 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 give me this, give me that, right? You're just being a beggar. Well, think about this for a second. God answers prayers according to his will. You've probably heard that before. God answers prayers. We pray all kinds of prayers. He answers prayers according to his will. And when we pray, and not that it has to be this exact method, but this is what Nehemiah shows us in chapter 1. When we pray kind of in this method, though, there is a great chance that you're praying according to God's will. And here's what I mean by that. If I skip all of this and just say, God, give me a Ferrari, is that God's will? I'm not sure. Okay, but let's back up for a second. If I start with, wow, God, this is who you are. I see it in my life. This is who you are. And by the way, God, sorry for the ways I have X, Y, and Z, the second one. And yes, what's in front of me is difficult, but I need to thank you for what I already have in my life. And then the fourth one, as we start to ask for something, chances are I'm not going to be asking for a Ferrari, right? Chances are that as I'm praising God, I'm confessing to God, I'm thanking him for what he's done, that what I ask him for, the supplies I need, are probably, as a great chance, are going to be inside God's will. Does that make sense? I found that helpful. And so you don't have to pray exactly this, but I do think it's helpful to stretch out our prayer life and cover some of these bases, because I think Nehemiah shows us that, exactly this prayer in Nehemiah chapter 1, and I encourage you to go back and look at it if you haven't seen it. But many of us really aren't clear what we need from God. We're clear about everything else. If you have to go to the store on the way home from church, you know what you need. Right? If you're going to go golfing, you know what you need. Go fishing, you know what you need. But if I ask you right now, what do you need from God? Do you know what you would say? I think this would be helpful advice, because it has been for me. How do we know what we need from God? How do we know what supplies we need? Well, here's the first one. The more we get to know the supplier, the more we get to know what supplies he has in his store. Right? So the truth is, and we keep coming back to prayer and scripture reading, but in here, you're going to look at the way God supplies all kinds of people with all kinds of things. So you're going to know about the supplier, but you can also know what he supplies. And he supplies it for all kinds of different people. And the more you're aware of how God works in the church and other people's lives, you see how God supplies. So the first one really is, what does the supplier have in his store, right? What kind of supplies does he have for his children? But the second one is inventory of ourselves. Now, we talk a lot about in the church about what are your spiritual gifts, but I'm a big advocate of not just that, but what do you not have? Where are you weak? And have the confidence to say, I'm not good at this. A true story for me was part of the reason why I never wanted to plant a church was that I kept saying, as this thing about coming to Wilmington and planting a church was kind of becoming real. But in my mind, I thought, God, if you don't supply me with people who will come around me and can actually read an Excel spreadsheet and love logistics and numbers and signs and budget forecasting and all those things that suck me dry, right? If you don't give me those kind of people, I'm not going. That's kind of my prayer. Like, if you know the story of Moses, you remember Moses, God was calling Moses to something. He's like, well, by the way, I don't talk very well, God, so I don't think I can go because I'm not a good speaker. And God says, I got this. Here's Aaron, right? I'll give you Aaron. He's really good with his mouth. You guys go on now, right? So we give these excuses of why we won't do something. And as some of the first people heard we were coming back and said that we want to be a part of this, guess what kind of people they were? People that can read spreadsheets, right? They know what Excel spreadsheets are. They know what the red and black means with money and which one's good and which one's bad, right? And pastors are like, which one's, I always say that, is it red or black? We want to be in the red or the black. So God is putting these people around me and I'm saying, this is who I personally need. People who have strengths in areas of my weakness. Where are you weak? Where are you weak? Where are areas where you need God to speak or to respond to your weakness? The third one I'd say is this, is to take inventory of the task at hand. Whether you know it or not, I think God's called you to something specific. Could be in your home, could be at your work, could be at your neighborhood, could be at school. God's called you to something, I think, to pay attention to in this season. What spiritual supplies do you need? So here's just a couple examples I've been writing down. What spiritual supplies do you need to be a Christian in the workplace? I know it's not easy. What do you need God to provide you to be a Christian in the workplace? What supplies do you need to care for the hurting person that you're caring for right now? What do you need from God? What do you need from God to mend a certain relationship in your life? What do you need for those of you that are experiencing grief right now or have friends who are experiencing grief? What do you need from God right now? Marriage, parenting, dating, all those things, being single, being a widow, being a widower, they all carry difficulties. What do you need to honor God in those, life stages? It's like grocery shopping. How many of you make a list to go grocery shopping? How many of you wing it? Yeah. But it's like grocery shopping. It's like, go ahead and make a list. God, here's what I need. I think I'm kind of scared. I know there's folks here who are pregnant, expecting children. I'm kind of scared to be a dad or a mom. What do you think you need to be a good dad or a good mom? Ask for it. Ask for it. That's one of the things that I think we get into trouble with a lot is we have not because we ask not. Right? We're always saying to kids like, well, did you ask for help? Did you ask the teacher to help you? No. But for us as Christians, hey, 40-year-old, 50-year-old, 30-year-old, did you ask God for help? Well, no, he's busy. Ask for help. Ask for help. We see it all through Scripture. We see it modeled. Ask for help. You know why it's so great to ask for help? Because it's one more sign that you're not God and that he is. What a great reminder. Sometimes we get tricking ourselves that we're God. And when you ask for help, you're realizing you are not divine, right? You are human, and you have a God who is divine. And so we ask for help. So when some people say, is asking for help begging, what's the answer? Yes, it is begging. Yeah. Here's my advice to you. Be a beggar. What's a beggar? Beggar is someone that has need. Martin Luther said, we're just one beggar telling another beggar where to find bread. Isn't that true? That's all I am as your pastor. I'm one beggar, meaning one person in need. So we look at begging as like annoying. No, begging is someone saying, I have need. This is what I need. And guess what? So do you. And all the people I run into, whether I'm at Walmart or wherever else, they need this too. Everybody watching the football game tonight, they need the bread too. We're just one beggar telling another beggar where to find it. The end of the story, if you read it in chapter 6, the wall gets completed in 52 days. Here's the best part of the story. Do you know what happens to those old men that I was telling you that look like the Muppets that are like, rah, rah, rah? Do you know what they end up doing? They essentially end up saying, well, maybe God really was in that whole wall thing you're doing. Maybe God was behind Nehemiah. I love that. Think about that. Some of you are in the midst of something right now and people are kind of naysaying, but what does it look like to pay such attention to who God is and what God's up to that the voices out here start to just go away? And then at some point, people come around and they say, there's something about that person. There's something about that wall that I want to pay attention to. When I was not a Christian, that's what I paid attention to. I wanted to pay attention to the person that didn't just want to preach to me and tell me I needed to quit doing a bunch of things. I wanted to see the person who was so in love with God that everything they did radiated because they just wanted to serve God and they weren't playing games about messing with other things. They were so focused on God. That was the best sermon you could ever preach to Nate Stratman in college. I want to read you this quote. This is what I think about when I think about Nehemiah. This is by a guy named Henry Nouwen, who's one of my heroes. He said, although we tend to think about saints as holy and pious and picture them with halos above their heads and ecstatic gazes, true saints are much more accessible. They are men and women like us who live ordinary lives and struggle with ordinary problems. What makes them saints is their clear and unwavering focus on God and God's people. Imagine with me just for a second as I close. How would our homes and our places of work and our neighborhoods and our city and our nation and our world, how would they look different if more and more broken, ordinary people had an unwavering focus on the God of the universe and God's people? What's more powerful than that? What's more powerful than that? Amen?